as you may or may not know, yesterday was the Christian celebration of Epiphany. And I also think that it is Christmas for the Eastern Orthodox Christians as well. Epiphany is one of the oldest Christian religious celebrations that there is. And we don't know much about it, it seems. But just the word itself, Epiphany, means a theophany, a kind of, you have this phrase, he had a great epiphany, a sudden revelation, and a sudden realization that immediately alerts us to something to do with the goal of life, or the final cusp, if you like, of the goal of life, which is realization itself. But it also means manifestation. And so you'll know that the story goes that Epiphany, also called the Three Kings celebration, is when the three kings from the Orient, there's a song like that, isn't it? We three kings of Orient are. We always thought it was Orient are, but Orient and then another word are. And the idea of creating kings, as opposed to maybe astronomers or astrologers following a star, is that they are coming to give kingly worship. And that's represented in their gifts. And we only find this really in the Gospel of Matthew. We don't find it anywhere else. So I thought it would be worthwhile reading their account of this Magi, or Magi. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but you can see it's related to the English word magic. And also, Maya has the same kind of root and same kind of connotation. This world is produced somehow by a kind of magic, a kind of illusion or apparitional causation that takes place. And these kings, or these wise people coming from the east, that's how it's mentioned, following a star, naturally we assume that they learned the art of astrology. We know that the Babylonians, for example, were well versed in it. And when we talk of Persia, of course, we're talking of the ancient East. That includes India. In the ancient days, there were no borders like that. There was only one land. And in the ancient days, we think that these countries were all isolated. They weren't, because we know that the ancient Greeks and the ancient Indians were trading together, and there were many Greeks resident in India. So we have this evidence, this archaeological evidence of this exchange of cultures. And so even from the early centuries of the previous era, that is, let's say the 3rd and 4th centuries, maybe even the 5th centuries, around about the Buddhist period of time, there was a very vigorous interaction, and Buddhist missionaries were being sent all over the Middle Eastern world, such as, or the Mediterranean world, I should say, including Egypt and including Syria and all these various places, what we call Armenia, Greece, and so on. They were all there in a cultural exchange and interchange. I don't know why we think that it was any different. And so the idea was that a star is interpreted as the birth of a great king, Messiah. Whether it is literally so or not doesn't concern us. What concerns us really more is the meaning of it. Anyway, let us see what Matthew's account looks like. And so, and it goes like this. And Jesus, being born in Bethlehem in Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is the King of the Jews born? That's why the assumption is that these are kings. Kings giving kingly worship. And so we have seen his star in the east, and they've come to worship him. And they report this to the current king, King Herod. And hearing this, he gets troubled. King Herod, of course, was very much in league culturally with the Romans, a kind of puppet king. And there were the assembled chief priests, says this text, and scribes of the people, and inquired of them where the Christ is born, where is the Messiah born. Now, never mind about the historicity of this, the value is in the story. And they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet. Don't ask how they knew that. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the governors of Judah, for out of you shall come a governor who shall rule my people Israel. They give a quotation from what we call the Old Testament. And then, of course, calling the Magi secretly, he asks them, well, what is the precise time and when the star appeared? And sending them to Bethlehem, and said, go and inquire diligently for the young child, and when you have found him, tell me that I also may come and worship him. Now, immediately, people of Hindu culture will see in this a story of Krishna, how Krishna was, born in an imprisoned state, and how the threat of the eighth child was going to, of Vasudeva, was going to kill the tyrant king, Kamsa. Anyway, whether there is a connection between the stories is beyond our scope. Go and inquire diligently about their child, and hearing the king, they departed, and behold, the star, which they saw in the east, went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. And seeing the star, they rejoiced with great joy. And coming into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother. Now we can imagine a scene, and we get a clue, because the image is normally that this birth takes place in a cave or a stable or some shelter. The clue being it's a manger, a cow trough, a trough where animals get fed. And so immediately we can see this great king, as it were, being born in very humble surroundings. But what is the significance of this story? We can imagine these beings, these three visitors, encountering the inward child, the inner entity, the inner child. And this is a good theme for meditation, of course. And what are they bringing? They're bringing gifts. We'll come to that, of course. Coming to the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him, just as we would when we recognize the divinity that is sitting in our own divine hearts. We feel this sense of worship coming upon us. And opening their treasures, they presented him gifts. And the gifts are significant: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so the whole story continues in this way. So what is the significance for us studying Vedanta? How would we introduce some deeper meaning into this? We've already seen how we can imagine the stable as a construction of the physical body, how the child lying in a manger is the divine inner self of us, and we can see these three beings coming and representing those who are not from the Jewish ethnic or religious backgrounds. And so from the Christian point of view, this would be the opening up of the Messiah, the Christ, the divinity, to all people, not just a select group. As I've said a few times before, the danger in any organization, any organized structure that wants to assist us in our spiritual life will have to have an absence of group interests, be they ethnic, be they religious, be they cultural. Secondly, they must be devoid of institutional protectionism. And thirdly, there must be a whole feeling of absolute love, unconditional love. There should be no absence of it. There should be no harmful aspect of it. There should be no counter thoughts. There should all be just be love, which involves a spirit of charity, charity in speech and of behavior, and all of these things coming out should be spontaneous outpouring from love. And so these gifts are gifts being freely given, not that any king requires these gifts, but what do they represent? This is quite significant. Gold, what does it represent? Well, gold you give to a king. So gold is there, and gold for us might represent, for example, the quality of purity, sattva, because gold is the purest metal that we have. In fact, if you have any ornament made from pure gold, it is so soft and yet so heavy that it has to be alloyed to be of some use with copper or with silver, some such amalgam. So we can say that this is sattva. And then the second thing is frankincense. Now, frankincense is offered to high priests. And frankincense is something that is very fragrant. So we can say that it's something that is pervasive, something that is active. And so frankincense perhaps could represent the guna of rajas, intense activity. All of it is to do with divine glory or dispensation of it. But myrrh is something that you put on a corpse, you dress a corpse, representing a humanity. So representing kingship, representing a high priestliness, and also representing man or death, tamas. Now we have the three gunas. The three gunas are coming, nature itself, this manifested dimension of the divinity coming and joining with the form-filled divinity who represents, in a way, this absolute. So we have a neat kind of philosophy behind this that gives us capacity to engage in a meditative view of this epiphany and leading us to a theophany. What is a theophany? Theophany is a sudden realization, a revelation, an aha moment when it all comes together. And revelation involves joy. It gets revealed on the basis that the truth of our own divinity is unchanging. It is there, whether we know it or not. Subconsciously we know it, but whether we actually know it in our full understanding, whether we believe that this is the permanent reality, or whether we are deluded into thinking that the external world with its transitoriness is the reality. In the meditation I gave earlier on, one of the components was the transitory nature of things. We cease to become attached to things when we realize their ephemeral transitory nature, something that is fleeting, something that has a birth, a life, and a death. So we can see the kingly thing is there. This is our intrinsic capacity through sattva to reveal our own divinity, our own highest self, our own inner king or our own inner kingdom that is within. And the frankincense, something that is to go everywhere. The second person of the Hindu Trinity is called Vishnu, the thing that pervades everywhere. And so the thing that is sustaining and maintaining all of us, which is there by its fragrance. And the myrrh is the kind of soothing cream, if you like, or the embalming cream that is used for a body, representing humanity. A king, a high priest, and a human, a person, somebody who shares our humanity. The whole principle of avatara, that is the divinity descending, or the Word becoming flesh and dwelling amongst us is that how can we have divine intervention where there is disharmony, when harmony is established and restored, when dharma is there to counteract adharma. It can only be if this divinity comes to the human level. And that is the whole principle behind this avatara, this idea of descending, this Lord descending here, suffering what we are suffering. No point in complaining about our suffering, be it mental or physical. The nature of the psychophysical is suffering. There are moments of joy, no doubt, but in order to avoid pain, we have to do some things to keep the body healthy, diet, exercise, and so on. Right thinking is an essential component. And to keep the mind healthy, we have to fill it continuously with high ideals, noble thoughts, delightful thoughts. The whole key in spiritual life on a day-to-day practical basis is to fill the mind as if it were a vessel, displacing all the negatives and filling up with all the positives so that the mind becomes completely delightful. Now, it's not that we are always in an equilibrium. The equilibrium gets upset from time to time as a reaction. And even with me, no doubt, it comes as a reaction to certain circumstances. But soon the recovery is there. Soon that is halted and paused, and something else is put in, something higher is put in. I have a great advantage. In doing all these talks, I am automatically, with your help, filling up with the divine. So I'm a beneficiary, not just you. We are all beneficiaries of this. So this Magi, this Maya is coming, is visiting, and the Epiphany is not just about that, it's also about the baptism of Jesus. Because straight away, in all the narratives following the birth, is a launch into public life. And there we can see or imagine John the Baptizer, Jesus' guru, baptizing him, giving him an initiation using water. Some scholars will think that John is an Essene living in the deserts, living a monastic life, if you like, or more like a hermit life, but dedicated to preaching the idea of renunciation, the idea of reviewing all your misunderstandings, all your ignorant moments, and repenting. So, of course, you have to repent first before you repent. But that's the idea. Repenting means leaving the past where it is and using the water in this case as a symbol of purification. When we take a bath, we should think of that. We are purifying the body and purifying the body physically. But we should also think that we are purifying the mind through prayer, meditation, japa, repeating the divine holy name, and doing it continuously. Now, there are various accounts in the various Gospels designed to make a point. The Gospels are not there as historical accounts. Let's not make that error. They are there to teach us lessons. So let us see what is the deeper meaning of John. We all have to, mostly anyway, have to resort to a guru. We have to resort to purification. We have to resort to a new life, a kind of rebirth as a result. And then the other thing that is being celebrated is the first miracle that Jesus does, which is the wedding in Cana, representing the possibility of a transformation. It seems like a very mundane, superficial thing. The host at a wedding ceremony has run out of wine. And so even all the cheap stuff is gone. And then, can you do something for me? Can you do something for the host? the compassionate mother is asking her son, Jesus, will you do this? And he's reluctant. He's reluctant because such a minor thing, how can he spend his divine energy doing this? But in doing it, he reveals his divinity and his mastery over nature, in other words, his capacity as a yogi to transform something like water into wine, not just cheap wine, the very best. And so the comment from those people who are enjoying it is, the host has reserved the best for last. Normally the worst comes last. You get the dregs. So the lesson for us, when we have the capacity to transform discord into harmony, we have the capacity to transform water into wine. And the wine is significant because we can be inebriated with divine joy, with divine bliss, with the nectar of the divine. It's not only Jesus that has the capacity to do this. We have the capacity to do this. We have the capacity to transform something which is mundane, water, which also is a life-giving substance. In other words, life in general, and transform it into something beautiful. And so these three events are celebrated. The visit of the Magi, which shows that there is a certain relationship between nature and the divine as we would tend to separate it. But they're not separate. What we call nature has these three components, and the Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas are simply manifested expressions of the essence which we call Sat Chit Ananda. Existence itself comes out as life, comes out as the capacity to do, to be active. We call this Rajas. And then a creativity, and a constant creativity, a constant sense of being born, a constant creation. And then we have the Rajas, we have the Sattva, which is Vishnu. And Vishnu is Sattva because it maintains everything nicely, a good balance. It is full of light, it gives intelligence to everything. It expresses itself as consciousness. It is Chit, it is consciousness expressed. And it comes out as thinking. It comes out as the thinking which enables us to adjust our life. And then, of course, we come up with Tamas. And Tamas, we wouldn't think is bliss, and yet if you're in a deep, deep, peaceful sleep, you're also pretty blissful, because all the duality and concerns and worries of all the activity and so on is all gone. And of course, it is represented by Shiva, the one who's auspicious, because it terminates all our desires. He terminates all of our attachments, and gives us with that, when we are in St. Paul's language, when in order to gain eternal life, we have to be dead to ourselves, that kind of thing. So there's actually an enormous amount that we, as spiritual seekers and practitioners, can derive from this and every other festival of every other religion, culture, and so on and so forth. If we have a wish for it, we can grab that and find something profound and something that is practically applicable in our life as well. And then, of course, this theophany itself, realization itself. There was a discussion I heard. Somebody had said, how do we know that God exists? And it is because of theophanies that we know that there is an existent thing which is called God, or the Absolute, or the Divine Self. Of course, we can arrive at the Divine Self through analysis. We can do it through the eternal question that, say, Ramana Maharshi gave, who am I, who am I, who am I, constantly, relentlessly, taking away all the things which change and are ephemeral and which are clearly welded in together by virtue of them being parts, a conglomerate of parts. And this agglomerated thing, even agglomerated of cells which agree to be knitted together with a central identity moving forward, has to disband. It's just a law of nature. Anything knitted together has to disband. Secondly, anything knitted together from parts is for the good of an independent user agent, some other entity that is using it. Example, a door with hinges so I can walk through, a car with its various parts so I can drive it. I am not the car, I'm not the door. Same thing with the body. The body is a whole instrumental thing, very useful thing, made from material food and having the same components as the things that we observe, the material that we observe. If you want to boil it down to the atomic level, you can do it. Atoms joining atoms, molecules joining molecules, matter being transformed into energy. A big factory like that. Why? So that we can use it as a kind of car on a pilgrim journey to discover the nature of our own divine self. Then there's the mind, the engine, if you will, the thinking apparatus that has so many different components. The mind itself has the capacity to be the station where senses come in. Without the attention in what we call the mind, we have no external experiences. And deep within the mind, all our experiences get stored and come out as good or bad traits, positive or negative traits. And so we have to attend to that, not directly, but by filling up on the conscious level. And all of our unconscious experiences were originally conscious experiences. And these conscious experiences go through life after life after life, is our understanding. And so it is no accident that when we see something, we recall something, we have a playback of it, and then it depends how we deal with it. Whether we deal with it in a positive way or whether we allow it in an untrained way, in a haphazard, meandering way, to have its day in court and just run wild, untrained, undirected. Control of the mind, therefore, or concentration, is the primary means that we have in order to settle this mind. And that is the key instrument, because all of this that we call the world is a product, according to our yoga philosophy, is a product of the mind, a product of our thinking, the creativity of the unconscious thinking, bringing up the potential creativity that is there at the very deepest level of our experience, namely where there's a potentiality, a dreamless sleep, a deep sleep, coming out as variegations, subtle forces, subtle elements, and condensing ultimately as the world that we relate to, that gives us a sense of it being concrete and actual. But the whole thing, you can see, is a wonderful, wonderful mistake. The whole thing is presented to us in such a way that we get engaged in it or attached to it and make the wrong conclusions. I am this, I am that. And that gives us enormous pain and enormous problems. So what will we learn from Epiphany as a way out? We will humbly, even though we may think we are important, we will humbly reduce our importance in submission to the ultimate king, the ultimate king that rules the entire universe. That's the idea. Our own kingship, our own sense of importance, giving way to that. Offering or recognizing these three gifts. Lord, you are the king, or the queen, or the monarch. Lord, you pervade everywhere. And Lord, you are responsible for birth, life, and death, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then understanding that in order to progress, in order to purify the mind, we probably require this constant renewal, this constant baptism. The text says, and I think it's in Luke, or it's in one of the Gospels anyway, here comes one, I'm baptizing you with water, but he's going to do it with the Holy Spirit. And so it is the reformation of our spirit, of our divine energy, that engages inspiration. When we let go our own individuality, we get filled up with creative inspiration. God's voice, if you will. God's voice talking to us and directing us. The more we experience that, the more faith we have in it. The more faith we have in it, the easier things open up for us. That's the progression. And then a new life, a renewed second, a renewed minute, a renewed day, a new opportunity. And then finally, the capacity to transform the ordinary to the extraordinary. I always remember having a conversation in England, I think it was. I was with a family and they said, but it's all right for people like yourself. But us ordinary people, I said, hold it there. We are all extraordinary. You're all extraordinary. You have talents and capacities and abilities, and you have infinite potential. But if you don't recognize it, you will be limiting yourself, a self-limiting script that you're continuously talking about. So these are some things that arise from the subject of epiphany, and I hope that you had an epiphany from it. And again, coming back to the very word epiphany, meaning that this theophany, this sudden revelation. In a discussion, I heard the idea was, can we prove that there is a God? I mentioned that. It is because somebody had a theophany. In Christianity, Paul, the biggest persecuted Christian, Saul, I should say, became Paul. He had a theophany that transformed his life. He had never met Jesus, and yet he calls himself the apostle, who is more of an apostle than those who saw Jesus and lived and worked and walked with him. Because his revelation, his theophany, was so highly impactful. Now you may say, if you're a kind of materialist or naturalist, you'll say, that is all some kind of neurosis, all kind of some self-hypnosis. The neurologist can easily explain such a thing, in the hippocampus of the brain. Well, you might feel the effects of it, see, but then we have to test it out. Now, I always recall Sri Ramakrishna was always in a testing mood and invited tests. This is the product of your heated brain, some of his critics said. Some of his greatest devotees were early on his greatest critics. It's a product of your heated brain. It's all your imagination. It's all illusion. It's all hallucination, etc., etc. Despite the fact that all of his inner circle, talking about Ramakrishna now, all of his inner circle saw firsthand remarkable things. And we have just passed the 1st of January, where the most remarkable revelation took place. A theophany took place there, where Ramakrishna immediately exposes something extraordinary, something transformational. We can't figure it out. We can't analyze it. These things we cannot do. And when we look at the life of Jesus, we see he has this transformation as well before selected apostles. Some thinking he's Elijah born again and so on. But he's there shining in his glory. A wonderful picture, by the way, for meditation. seeing that our own ideal is not just an ordinary entity that we may see in a picture, even though we might give a form, an extraordinary form, so many hands, so many arms, all representing certain things. We can go further and understand the extent, the infinite extent, is a contradiction in terms, of course, the infinite extent of this entity, the glorious light of this entity, the glorious presence of this entity. And the more we engage with it, the more it gets revealed to us. We can't sit and complain and say it wasn't revealed to me. So these revelations take place, these transformations take place, and in people's personal lives, we see it. You ask a person, why are you religious or spiritual in any way? Because I had a personal encounter, they will say. And if you're skeptical, you can say, yes, it's just, it's a neurological thing, A psychiatrist or somebody like that will be able to highlight what happened here. But then that brings up other awkward questions. Is the brain a self-replicating thing? Is the experiences that we have, which we register as internal, are they part of the world? This book, What is Life, by a series of lectures by Schrödinger, the remarkable physicist, Erwin Schrödinger, he is curious enough to explore all these types of perceptions, all these types of approaches in figuring out what is life. Title of his book. And there he talks about the arithmetic paradox. His statement goes something like this. This world of sensory perception and thought ego, it seems to be an individual thing, and yet we experience a oneness everywhere. We experience a oneness and yet a multiplicity of individuals. And how can it be? How is it that the modern world, he's talking of the 1940s, early 1940s, but it still holds today. How is it that the modern world doesn't relate to this? In other words, eliminates, almost bypasses this subjective experience. And he says 7 words will cover it. And I forget the exact language of those 7 words, but it amounts to this. Because this internal sensory world is part of the world itself, part of the whole. It's not something separate from it. It is part and parcel of material energy and so on. And you either have 2 views. One is Leibniz's view that a life monad is completely disconnected from every other individuality. We don't feel it that way, but that's the theory. Or, and he mentions this, or it is only one, and that one as the Upanishads have it, he says. So there's Schrödinger, he who has studied the Upanishads, an Eastern way of thinking, and comes to a conclusion, it must be oneness. That's the way we resolve this paradox, this arithmetic paradox, that there are many and there is the one. How is it that we have a sense of one world and yet different individuals? Because there is an overlap in our experience. It is not totally separate. And when we look, therefore, at this final conclusion of oneness, must be oneness everywhere, it resolves our moral dilemmas or questions. Why should we be good to each other? Why should we be loving to each other? Why should we be compassionate? Why should we have any moral virtues at all? It's only because of this oneness. And then, of course, it gives rise to a oneness of energy, oneness of matter, oneness of energy, and ultimately, and that is what our physics tells us also, and ultimately one in the spirit, one in the spirit. And it is like a layered thing. The one in the spirit adjusts all the other layers, physical layers, energetic layers, etc. So there's not only the logic to this principle, but we can experience it. And we experience it in this theophany, and we experience it in the theophany of meditation, where we uncover layer after layer after layer of these various relativistic things, these various layers of material, various layers of atomic energetic materials, until we come to the thing that never changes. And when we get used to immersing ourselves in that, baptizing ourselves in that, reveling in that, then it becomes more and more revealing to us, habitually revealing, until it takes us over. And at the moment of takeover, we are free, completely free. The mind is completely saturated. We have salvation in the Christian language, which is a minimum of 51% sattva and 49% other things. We want to increase it. You will never get 100%. So this is all coming from dwelling on the importance of Epiphany. And we have some minutes left, so I can open up for any other comments or questions that you may have using this opportunity.
Thank you, Swami G. Very good talk. Just with the Magi, how well established was this thing Maya across the world, and how close was it to magic? Because as a boy, I heard of magic, but I didn't really associate it with Maya until I met your good self. So, I mean, how significant?
So the word magi, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but let's call it magi.
Yeah.
That is derived from the same word as magic. It really is etymologically coming from wizard, people who were involved in the kind of sciences which nobody else knew about, which looked like magic. In other words, astrology,
Yeah.
we might say astronomy, but they saw a star and interpreted it. That's called really astrology.
Yeah.
So they were astrologers coming from the East, presumably from Persia or somewhere like that. It doesn't say where, it simply says from the East.
Yeah.
So the East is widely viewed as an area of wisdom. So wise people who were involved in mysterious activities, activities that the ordinary people don't really understand, interpreting, reading the map of the sky and interpreting it. And so they saw the star.
Was it really true that a star would appear in the sky at the birth of a great man or an avatar? Is that true? I mean, it's never mentioned anywhere else.
Well, I think it could be. I mean, there are portents and signs, presumably from every birth. If you study the astrological chart of, let's say, Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Buddha, maybe, I don't know, there would be some kind of characteristics that would be
Do with astrology.
compatible with auspicious moments,
Right,
auspicious
yeah.
times and moments, and so on and so forth, things like that. You know,
I find that incredible. You know, the stars would realign at the birth of a so-called human being. You know.
well, there are other scholars who will say that it was a comet, uh, and they would establish the birth on various grounds, not of the year dot, but of the year, I think, around about six figure given, so on. And they would certainly be on record in that particular year of some things like
And the
that.
fact that in the Bible it says the star came to rest over where the child was born. I
Yeah.
mean, you're talking about someone's roof. You know, Just
Well,
seems
it would seem like that. Any body in the sky, when you look at it, it doesn't seem to move very much, does it?
no, no, and you wouldn't pick out a house from the location of a
Yeah,
star.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, is this important to take things literally or not, or what? Not
Yeah,
at
I'm
all.
sorry. Yeah, sorry. I'm just
Yeah,
splitting hairs
yeah,
here.
yeah. It's really
Yeah.
just the internal meaning of it. Take it as you want, A devout
No, but it is. I don't want to explain away the mystery and the beauty of
Yes,
the
yes.
story.
Some people are happy. Let it be a mystery. Let it
Yeah,
just be
exactly.
hanging there like the star.
Yeah.
And of course we have this pun as well. A star is born. That kind of thing. So it's all quaint and it's all significant. And I don't think we need to read too much into it. You
Well,
know.
somebody once said to me, if it wasn't true, there's no way it would have lasted for 2,000 years. You know what I mean? That's
Yes, certainly. I mean, something happened. Now, don't forget when the Gospels are written. The Gospels are written a long time after the birth of
correct.
Jesus
Yeah.
and even the death of Jesus. And the earliest texts that are contained, Christian texts, are contained in what we might call the New Testament. The canonical text would be letters of Paul, St. Paul,
Yeah.
and not the Gospels at all. And I think from St. Paul, so some scholars would say, I have to be careful, that they would have, Paul's view of things would have transferred to the gospel, the earliest gospel, which is generally understood to be Mark. I know it goes Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have a rhyme like that: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Something
Went to
like
bed with their trousers on,
that.
wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that. But actually, you see, the earliest would be Mark. And there's very good reason for understanding that. Mark doesn't start off with a birth at all. Mark has no birth. Mark starts off straight away with the baptism of Jesus. And and you can see that he is writing a basic thing and
Yeah.
conveying a basic message, which I think is St. Paul's message, an apocryphal message. By the time it comes to Matthew and Luke, we don't know which is earlier, we see that they are taking some of Mark and changing some things which they find awkward in Mark, they're changing.
Mm.
Luke is leaving whole passages out, but taking a lot of Mark. And then obviously most scholars would think that they are taking from another source, which they label as Quell or Q for short.
Yep, yeah, I've heard all about that. Yeah.
And so whatever that source is, and many scholars think that there was another source like that. Of course, it could be Marcion. Many people might think it's Marcion, and they were bringing that in. And so they're using Mark as a base, changing things which are inconvenient or adding things. But we have to understand when we study these things, the question is, who wrote it? For whom was it written? What was the context in which it was written? And what was the message that was being conveyed? It was not meant to be a history. It wasn't supposed to be a historical account of.
Yeah, an accurate historical account. So
That
it's a
wasn't
message that's being delivered. Yeah.
no. It was there to convey some message to the reader.
Yeah.
And that is why fairly contradictory passages in Gospels can be reconciled to the extent that we have the illusion it's one text. We have the illusion that, oh, the Gospels say this and the Gospels say that, without actually breaking it down. No, actually, Mark says, yes,
Believe
so
would
we have
mean
to
anything. You know
see.
what I mean?
See, Matthew is keen to invoke many, many passages from the
The Old Testament going back to
Jewish
King David.
scriptures and so on, Isaiah and so on and so forth. Mark does the same thing and mixes up a number of quotations and so on to justify his position. And Matthew does the same thing. And Matthew's point is, this is a Messiah that was foretold.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, many of the passages are out of context.
Yeah.
But that's his point of view. So from Matthew's point of view, everything has to be in Bethlehem. And Luke as well. Luke makes this point as well. But Matthew is the only place where we find this Epiphany story.
Oh, is it? Yeah, the three
We
wise
don't find
men.
it, we don't find
Yeah.
it anywhere else. We don't find any birth narrative in Mark, and we don't find any mention of it in Luke and John. Very little of. I don't think there's any birth narrative in John.
That's interesting.
So, so we have this illusion that they're all saying the same thing, and we
Yeah.
say it's in the Gospels. But if you look at it closely, it's in one Gospel, and that is the Gospel of Matthew. And
You know your Bible,
what a wonderful story, because how much we got out of it, when we reflect on its meaning. All good.
Thanks, Swami. Very good.
All right, all right. So I hope to see you all shortly. So, all right. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thanks, Swami.